Hi everyone, welcome to this breakout session at today's Digital Ethics Summit. I'm Jabahir Asghari, I'm the Policy Manager for Digital Regulation at techUK, and I'll be chairing today's session on what will holding elections in an era of generative AI be like, and what can we do to prepare. I'm joined by some great speakers today for what I'm sure will be a really interesting discussion. So I've got with me Henry Parker, Global Head of Government Affairs at Logically AI. Also joined by Arit Chowdhury, who's Head of Policy at the Royal Society. Online, we've got Stephanie Valdez-Scott, who's the EMEA Director for Policy and Government Relations at Adobe. Stephanie's dialing in from Munich. So thank you for joining, Stephanie. I hope you can hear us online. And we've also got HP Dallin, who's Head of IBM Watson Governance EMEA at IBM. Now, appreciate we've only got a short bit of time today, and when we talk about generative AI, 40 minutes is never enough. But we will hopefully keep to time and close before 10. Before we head into the discussion, though, to kick off, we are opening with some opening remarks from HP.
Thank you very much. And since we sponsor this session, this is my opportunity to advertise IBM, I suppose. Now, there are some young people in here, and I always feel that I have to explain what IBM is. IBM is a 112-year-old technology company. You may have heard of us, or maybe not if you're very, very young, but anyway, you know. We've done AI probably since, technology-wise, since the 60s in sort of terms of machine learning, commercially, since 2011, when our technology Watson beat a couple of reigning Jeopardy champions. So we've done about 40,000 AI-related projects worldwide. I heard earlier today that next year is probably the biggest year for election in the history of mankind, right? We've got not an insignificant election in the US, also in the UK. We've got India and some of the really, really, really big countries with lots of population. So generative AI represents not a new threat, I would say, probably an amplified one. And that's what we're going to discuss on the panel today. And it's not just about generative AI either. I live in Denmark, and unlike some countries with 2 or 3 parties to vote for, in Denmark we have a proper democracy with 14 parties to vote for in our general election. And I read about the Snapchat function My AI, and first-time voters in Denmark last year, about a year ago, asked My AI which party should I vote for if I care about things like tax release, for instance. And My AI gave inaccurate answers. You should look at the Labour Party. Labour Party's never been in favour of tax release in Denmark. Then they asked what if I'm really concerned about our welfare society, and they pointed towards the 2 parties to the far left. Now, is welfare just a question for parties to the left? It's not a generative AI application as such, it's just a chatbot that you can interact with. But if you don't control the output from chatbots like that, it has the potential to impact and influence our elections. And that is dangerous for our democratic processes. One last final word on this before we dive into the panel. The EU AI Act may or may not be agreed upon today, maybe, but they've chosen a risk-based approach. And so they've identified a number of use cases they consider high risk. Democratic process is a high-risk use case for the EU. So things like chatbot that will answer questions around which party you should vote for will come under high-risk use case for the EU. So this is a high-risk area also for regulators. Those that want to deliberately harm us will try so regardless of regulation, I guess. So I'm interested in the panel discussion today to hear what kind of level we're going to discuss. So welcome and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, HP. Yes, as HP mentioned, so IBM are kindly our event sponsor for today. And just to flag, we do have some forms.
I did forget to say that. We are 112-year-olds, so we're kind of old school. We didn't get I guess, information of who you are because of GDPR. So we would really appreciate if you would tell us who you are, so maybe we can contact you afterwards, if you're interested. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries, thanks so much. Yeah, if everyone could fill out the forms, that would be greatly appreciated. And just one small bit of housekeeping, we will be fielding questions from the audience. We do have a roving mic at the back from techUK, so if anyone has any questions throughout the discussion, then please just raise a hand and the mic will come to you. But yes, I mean, as HP's already highlighted, 2024 national elections are going to be held in the UK, US, Taiwan, among other countries. There are alarm bells already being raised about the potential impact of AI on democratic processes, on communities and on society. And many are already asking about what these potential developments of AI could mean for things like our political elections, our trust in political narratives, especially online, and our trust in political figures. So without further ado, I think probably good to dive into the discussion. We'll structure it in terms of three kind of key areas. Firstly, looking at the scale of the threat at the moment, kind of where are we today? Secondly, potential solutions that we've got, technology solutions in the space. And thirdly, how can we prepare essentially for elections next year? Now, to open up, I think it would be good to understand what the scale of the issue is right now. Are these new challenges that we're facing? Are they progressing ones? And I'd like to turn to Henry first, if that's all right.
Sure. Okay, I'll just explain what perspective I'm coming at this from. So Logically is a company dedicated to tracking mis and disinformation in all its contexts. And we do that in three different ways. So we are a fact checker. We support social media platforms, as my colleague from Full Fact does on the front row, in helping to spot misinformation and disinformation, which is going viral, fact check it and advise their users about that. We're an OSINT company, so we essentially offer the same type of services that Bellingcat do, but we do that mainly for governments. And we're also an AI company, but what we're trying to do is use AI to actually manage the problem we're discussing today, which is how you track, manage, and reduce the harm that disinformation creates. So with that sort of hat on, I think there's probably 2 points I would link the risk that we're facing to. The first thing I would say is that the question on everybody's lips is, will a mass circulation of a deepfake that is generated by a generative AI tool change the result of an election if someone tries to do that? And I think most of the research literature that there is out there that suggests what the impact of something like that would suggest that it's unlikely to actually be something that will change somebody's vote. So you'd be surprised at how much influence these types of things might have on exactly what decision somebody might take as a result of seeing them. But, and I think this goes for disinformation and misinformation as a whole, certainly there is scope for a large-scale breakdown in trust of the overall information environment in which this election takes place in, as a result of a mis or disinformation campaign. And arguably, this is not a new problem. Mis and disinformation happens today. It's happened for thousands of years, actually. And quite a lot of the time, that's been the broad effect of what these have been, the overall pollution of the information environment that we sit in. I think the second primary impact that we might see as a result of this new technology coming in is, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, the democratization of disinformation. So to illustrate what I mean, take something like the 2016 presidential election. There was a direct attempt to manipulate that through a disinformation campaign that's been well explored from Russia. That cost $12 million. It took a building full of 400 staff to deliver. And I think what we are now seeing with the mass availability of these tools is the ability for a campaign like that to be done much more quickly, much more cheaply, and much more efficiently than it has previously been delivered. And there are proofs of concept out there. I would look them up. One is called CounterCloud, which has been well documented. The idea that you can actually use generative AI not just to produce a fake piece of content. You could use it end to end to actually produce the content, attach an article I'm talking about here, attach audio and video to that, have the AI then post that on social media, and point users back to that website that is entirely AI-generated end-to-end. And that can be done, I think, the test that they did for under $1,000. So you're going from $12 million to $1,000, from 400 people to 3 to 4 people. And the question of the risk is, because that is so much easier to do, the risk of disinformation being done by somebody who is not a foreign state to manipulate election is a lot higher than it previously was. And that is the primary nature of the risk we're facing. I'll finish by saying that we are starting to see this, so I can't say in what capacity we were working doing this, but we worked directly with the Slovakian government on their election recently. We tracked what happened with the deepfakes there, and we advised them about how to manage that. And I would say that is the first election that we have seen where there was a demonstrable attempt to circulate fake content. Whether that was coordinated or not, it certainly was circulated, and it did play at least a degree of a role in what the at least the discourse around that election was. And you started to see the trust there. So 2 key points I would finish with. The first one is around this democratization point. And I think the second one is also about this idea of an overall breakdown in the information environment and the trust that people have, as opposed to this campaign suddenly meaning the result is going to swing one way or the other. It's that environment that I think is really important.
Thanks, Henry. Arik, I wondered if I could come to you. So I know that the Royal Society have done a lot of research on deepfakes and their proliferation online. Are you seeing similar things here? The erosion of trust, lower barriers to entry?
Yeah. Let me give a bit of background first. So the Royal Society, if you don't know, is the UK's National Academy of Science. And to one up IBM, we are 360 years old. We're the oldest scientific institution in the world. And we're a fellowship of the world's leading scientists. And I head up our policy team on data and digital technologies, and we've done a lot of work on scientific disinformation and the science of disinformation. And we published a report last year called the Online Information Environment. Within that report, we looked at the challenge of AI-generated disinformation, in particular around deepfakes, and we published an academic paper just last week on an experimental deepfake detection survey to see whether the public could detect a high-quality deepfake with and without a content warning. And the TLDR of that is basically they can't. The vast majority could not detect a high-quality deepfake with or without a warning. And since then, we've done a couple of workshops with the BBC and last week with the BBC and Wikimedia on content provenance, which is this idea that you can understand where a piece of content originated from and how it was manipulated, and how that could be a possible solution to deepfakes, to at least know that something was edited. Loads of problems with that, one of which is manipulation can be quite subjective. If you crop an image, is that a manipulation? You might be cropping it for aesthetic reasons, you might be cropping it because you want to remove some important context from that image. If you add a filter, is that manipulation? When you take a photo on your photo already manipulates that image when it shows you the image on your screen. It's not the image that was taken necessarily. So those are all subjective challenges, and if you were to manipulate the system, you could edit a single pixel in an image and have it flagged as manipulated content, potentially. Loads of issues around it. And secondly, we did a workshop on information literacy and AI-generated content and the issues surrounding marginalised communities, looking at the sort of challenges on actually promoting information literacy as a solution. Separately to that, a few years ago, before I joined the Royal Society, I produced some deepfakes. Probably some of the most viral political deepfakes. I will make that claim because no one's probably verified it. And these were deepfakes of Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn endorsing each other to be Prime Minister during the 2019 general election. And they also warned the viewers about the coming age of deepfakes and the challenges and the need to act on it. Unfortunately, in the last 4 years since that came out, nothing happened. And I have a pretty bleak view, actually, on next year's elections and the sort of challenges we've got around disinformation. And I was at an interesting roundtable this morning by the Oversight Board who work with Meta. And a statistic they gave was there won't be as many elections as there are next year until year 2048 or something. And if you think about the problems, first of all, if you compare it to 2016, which is the last big time where people cared about this because of Brexit and Trump, in many ways we've gone backwards in terms of our approaches to disinformation. First of all, the challenges got harder. we've now got ChatGPT, and it's much easier to generate some of this content. You've got more sophisticated and easier to create deepfakes and cheapfakes. We had this Keir Starmer audio fake a few months ago. By the time any research comes out on that, whether that impacted anyone, will be the year 2026 probably. So we don't know really how much impact this stuff has, but we do know it's inherently a bad thing for democracy. On top of that, how do we even know that this is a problem? Because we have good researchers looking into it who previously had access to Twitter data. That's much harder to get now. Access to data has been removed by a lot of companies for various reasons. On top of that, you're seeing legal action against researchers who reveal some of the harms on social media platforms. And now, if you're to research disinformation on a major platform, you risk your livelihood, and you could go bankrupt, and you can face criminal prosecution. So in a very bleak position, and we haven't done anything on literacy. The Online Safety Act has just come in, barely talks about disinformation, to be honest, in that act. Again, the Keir Starmer deep, there's one of the Mayor of London as well. Zero sort of urgency in our political system to take action on it. So I think we're in a pretty bleak position. But we're much more aware, I think, as a society of the issue. But I think what we need to do from now till, to be honest, 2024 is a write-off in my opinion. But beyond that, we should be thinking 10, 15 years time, this problem's going to get worse. We can't just rely on the systems we had a few years ago. What should we do next? Do we invest in literacy?
Yeah.
Do we establish methods for researcher access? Do we look at content provenance as a solution? There's loads of things we need to do on this issue.
Definitely. That's really interesting. Thank you. I wondered if Stephanie or HP wanted to come in on anything to do with kind of the scale of the threat. Otherwise, I think it leads on quite nicely to some of the solutions. Hopefully we can talk about that. Perfect.
Yeah, happy to quickly jump in. I won't take too long. Thanks for having me, first of all. It's quite scary to see myself up on this huge screen up in your room. So I'll try not to be too irritated by that. So maybe just a few thoughts from my end. So really, most of the speakers have touched upon it, saying obviously generative AI is a game changer in this, right? If you look at just for Adobe, we've got our own tool, which is called Adobe Firefly, which is a text-to-image model. And just over 8 months, we've had over 3 billion images that have been created using this model. And so it's really, we see generative AI as transforming the way we work and create things and also communicate. But then obviously the downside to it is that in the hands of bad actors, this technology can raise concerns and it can spread false content at mass scale. We still think, the saying, seeing is believing, that's still true for most people. Like, people become more skeptical overall when they read things, but when they see pictures or videos, or even when now with generative AI audio, I think the problem becomes even bigger. So there's certainly potential for more mis and disinformation and people believing it. And we think that especially in an election year, people's trust in digital content could have substantial consequences. So, I mean, we've seen earlier this year, deep fakes, like, the potential, the burning Pentagon, and that had an effect on the stock market. Earlier in the Ukrainian war, there was a video or potential video of President Zelensky ordering troops to surrender to Russian forces. So, like, these deepfakes are already out there, and I think they show everyone the potential that can have. But I think another point to look at is really that once people know that these deepfakes are out there, they tend to not trust anything anymore. And we think that also has a consequence for democratic discourse and, people believing political communication and also media. So that's why Adobe was one of the founding members of the Content Authenticity Initiative, which promotes an open standard for content provenance mechanism. So I don't want to talk too much about the solution yet, but just kind of as a little teaser for later discourse here.
No, thanks, Stephanie. And I think that does bring us on quite nicely to kind of the next part of the discussion. I think useful to talk about some of the solutions in the space. As you've already alluded to, we've got content provenance, so proving the true authenticity of any content online, whether it's been kind of whether it's been generated via synthetic media or generative AI. You've got deepfake detection and mitigation solutions in the space as well. But I wondered if I could turn to HP first. Kind of what are some of the tech solutions and initiatives already in the space? What steps have IBM been taking?
Well, from an IBM perspective, we promote openness. So when we're obviously a business-to-business supplier anyway, right? So when we do our foundation models, they come with full openness around the algorithms and all that. So openness is clearly part of it. And in order for digital watermarks to work, for instance, you need to have openness, and the algorithms from the foundation models needs to be open, which may or may not be a problem with certain other suppliers, whatever. If I was a politician, I would certainly get my own blockchain. Seriously, I would. If I was in an election, I would have, and all my content would have been digitally watermarked from the source. That's what blockchain does. So the technology is there. Whether we should influence the regulators to try or to actually regulate and have a sort of regulatory requirement that you digitally watermark your content is another question. As IBM, I don't have an opinion about that, but certainly it will have to be a part regulation, part technology to combat this.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll come to Henry and then we'll go back to Stephanie on content provenance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point. So I definitely think, and I'm sure Stephanie will talk to this, that digital watermarking, content provenance are part of the solution here. But I want to emphasize, and this is partly a self-interested point, they are only part of the solution. We actually look at this problem in a different way. We look at it not necessarily as a content provenance problem, but a dissemination problem. So it's really difficult to say that you can possibly authenticate every single piece of content as to whether it's AI generated or not. To borrow my CEO's phrase, it's a bit like boiling the ocean, to be quite frank. So what we are trying to do ourselves is actually use AI as a tool that can look at the online behaviors around the circulation of mis and disinformation content. That's what we've developed. So we have developed AI that actually spots what we call the tactics, techniques, and procedures behind people who want to run these types of campaigns. Now, it's not completely foolproof. We have to employ a very qualified team of human analysts to do this. Believe it or not, some of the tactics that a foreign state might do to do this are the same as a bunch of very avid Taylor Swift fans. They use the same online behaviors, to be honest. But we actually do try to think about using AI itself as a safety tool in this space, because it can be. It's not just the problem, it can be the solution too. I also think, and we launched something on Friday at the Google Trusted Media Summit, which we think is a bit of a game changer for our colleagues in the fact-checking space. So what we are trying to do is massively enhance their ability to look at the fact-check worthiness of a piece of content, whether that's text, audio or video, and just flag whether there are certain characteristics about it that need some additional scrutiny. Because what you are then able to do is massively scale up the efficiency of the human fact-checker's task in verifying whether these things are true or false. And I think the final piece here is to recognize that nobody has yet worked out a way of authenticating whether a piece of text is AI generated or not. OpenAI have shut down a project to do that because even they don't know how to do it. So we haven't quite worked out the full content provenance sort of structure. Now, I'm not criticizing it at all. It's part of the solution, but not the sole solution. And the debate we're trying to encourage is what is the role of AI itself in solving the problem that generative AI is creating in terms of the distrust that we see.
Great, thanks, Henry. On kind of AI as a solution, Stephanie, I wonder if we might hear a bit more about Adobe CAI and CPC2.
Yeah, sure, happy to. And Henry, I completely agree that obviously, the whole discussion around content provenance, we have to be really realistic that it's one piece of the puzzle in, fighting mis and disinformation. It's not the solution. We're nowhere near saying, this will solve all our problems, but we really think that it's one of the most effective components. And the way it works really is that it's trying to restore trust in our digital world. by establishing a global standard that kind of leverages the power of provenance to help creators prove what's true. So we're kind of changing the way to look at it a bit by saying, let's give the good actors out there a technical solution to authenticate their work rather than try to capture all the bad guys and try to detect all the deepfakes out there. Because we simply say, and HP alluded to that in his initial remarks, that bad actors probably won't care, right? People who have the intention to deceive, who have the intention of creating and especially spreading mis and disinformation will continue to do so. But we do think that by giving the good actors and what Henry said, the kind of the newsworthy actors like politicians, journalists, etc., a way to authenticate their work, that people will become more skeptical if they don't have a way to verify the content themselves. And really, the way Adobe is looking at it, and we've co-founded the Content Authenticity Initiative, and we also co-established an independent non-profit standards organization, which is called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. In short, it's C2PA. And the C2PA really publishes and promotes this open technical standard for provenance technology, so anyone can implement it into their tools and platforms. And the standard started with images, but now incorporates also solutions for audio and video, and we're working on documents as well. So happy to keep everyone updated on the documents part. And the technology behind it is called content credentials. They're built on this open technical standard. And as I said, the code for content credentials is free. It's available in an open source toolkit. And these tools really enable the broader developer community to integrate content provenance across web, desktop, and mobile project implementations for creators and consumers alike. So anyone can build content credentials. Everyone should, in our view. And really previous efforts to combat deepfakes have focused a lot around automated detection. And obviously, yeah, that's still an important thing to do. But we fear that it won't be enough to fight mis and disinformation at scale. So yeah, really that's kind of a short intro on content credentials, but happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions in the audience on that? Brilliant. Yes, I think we've got one right at the back. There should be a mic behind you.
Hi. Is this on? Yeah, it is. Just on this discussion about provenance, in the context of democratic elections and content that's seeking to, influence people one way or another, I was interested in the reference to the Online Safety Act because I think what that may create is a slight exacerbation because some of the largest network platforms are now going to be under a duty to protect democratic content under the Online Safety Act. There is a Category 1 services duty to protect content which is of democratic importance. Now, that hasn't come into force yet because the code hasn't been published. It's under the user empowerment duties. And so I think that does create for those network platforms a bit of a difficulty in taking down content that is democratic in nature, but is basically fake. Do you guys agree, and what do you see as being some of the tools that they could use?
Try. I mean, I have to say that's passed us by. I mean, we obviously look quite closely at what duties are being created for platforms under the Act. And as far as we can see, there is only one very specific situation in which platforms would have to proactively monitor for and remove content that may be intended to manipulate the democratic process. And that's very specifically where it can be shown that that content originates from a foreign state. So there is a new offence that's in the National Security Act that is referenced in the Online Safety Act called foreign interference. And that mandates that they should put in place processes to make sure that if a piece of content that could be linked to a foreign influence campaign, it needs to be removed as quickly as possible so that the harm from it is associated. But that doesn't apply to a non-state-backed actor. It explicitly is about foreign situations. So one of the main issues we have actually in the context of this is, well, what if one of these people who is not a foreign state sits in their bedroom with a generative AI tool And actually, I'm not going to embarrass those who make generative AI tools by saying what the results of our testing of these were, but we have tested them all to see whether they will make electoral disinformation, and 3 of the most popular ones do. In 85% of cases produce it. It wouldn't necessarily be illegal for them to do that. And because it's not illegal, it's not illegal content, there is no direct responsibility on the platforms to proactively monitor for such content if it is not produced by a foreign state actor. So I'll take a quite close look at what you're talking about. It's not something that we have picked up on. Our focus has been on what is illegal in this space, because that's what the emphasis of the Online Safety Act is. It compels action in the case of illegal content. And in the mis- and disinformation space, it's conscious policy choice by government. Not much is illegal, so not much proactively has to be done. That's our reasoning on that.
Thanks, Henry. Unless anyone else wants to come in on that question, just in the instances of time, I might move on to our kind of final agenda point, which is how can we prepare? So with elections coming up next year, what should we be considering? I wondered if I could come to Eric first, and then we'll open up to the other panelists. I know that Royal Society did a report recently, so interested to hear kind of the findings from that, and kind of secondly, what steps we should think about when we look to addressing government on how to best prepare for the elections next year.
Yeah, so over lunch earlier, I was speaking with Gina Neff outside this handful noodle store in Spitalfields Market, and we were talking. So she was one of the people involved in this report on information environment. Brilliant individual, runs the Mindru Centre for Technology and Democracy. Actually speaking on a panel right now, I think. And we were talking about how far backwards we've gone on this question. So a lot of what we're talking about at the moment is a fabricated lie, so a fake video or fake claim or whatever. And that is a problem, but maybe actually we also want to know just where content comes from. Who is it? Who is it that's behind it? Is it a foreign state actor? Is it someone in their bedroom? To do that, just to reiterate my earlier point, we need to establish proper mechanisms for researcher access to data so that we actually understand what is going on these platforms. And again, that's only going to get more complicated. So pushing for mechanisms to do that. The European Digital Services Act, I think, is trying to do stuff on that, but I think it's fairly minimal. Another point I'll make is, often when we talk about this, people describe it as an arms race. So an arms race between deepfake producers and the people combating it. And I kind of want to elaborate on that a little bit more to further underline how difficult I think the problem is. Has anyone seen the program Catfish? Has anyone seen it? Are you familiar with it? So it's about, if you're not, I got addicted to it like a few years ago. It's about, television can be very useful for understanding the world, highly underrated. So it's about people who try to con other people on the internet into being in a relationship under a fake profile. And there's this episode I was watching the other day. I'm going somewhere with this. There's an episode I was watching the other day where some guy pretends to be this other person's girlfriend, and they go in with a camera and they go investigate who this is. And they ask him, why did you do this? And he said, I'm the Joker, I'm the king of catfish, I'm just a bad guy, right? And it made me think that there are just some people who are beyond help and will just do evil stuff to be evil. So when you think about this arms race in deepfakes and disinformation, you've got on the one side of the battle line, you've got foreign state actors, people doing it for fun, people who are just kind of evil, maybe other political parties who also want to do it. And then the other side, you've got this content provenance solution, might work, might not work, requires a lot of people to be involved. You've got fact checkers who are under-resourced, underfunded, can only focus on certain things, probably skewed towards English language content. Then you've got the people who might provide information literacy, librarians, parent groups, hospitals, whatever it might be, totally underfunded, totally overstretched. And that is a massive challenge, right? Foreign state actors versus librarian, that's the battle basically we've got. And I think in terms of, if we really want to take this seriously, a low-cost solution is investing in information literacy. Even that's a very imperfect solution. That is an immediate, low-cost solution that platforms, governments, Ofcom and others could do. And Ofcom now has bigger powers on media literacy as a result of the Online Safety Act. And then we need to start thinking about 10, 20, 30 years' time, what is this information going to look like? Because that is the timescale probably it will take to build real resilience around content provenance and all these other types of solutions. And in our report, we go into some depth about some of this stuff. It's called the Online Information Environment. If you search that, you'll find it, and you'll find a bunch of other stuff we've published as well.
Thanks, Arik. HBS, saw you nodding along. So
yeah, a couple of years ago we tried to build a news source tracker in IBM, and very quickly ran into intellectual property issues, so we had to stop it. So I think regulation is probably part of the solution as well, longer term. Shorter term, yeah, I think you're spot on. That's what we can do for 2024, isn't it? The longer term, we have to. Some of our regulation its intention is incredibly good, but it takes the regulation too far, maybe. So it's counterproductive. And if we're to combat fake news and spread fake news, we must be able to track its source.
Brilliant, thank you. In the instances of time, I know we've only got 5 minutes left, so keen to bring in Stephanie and then Henry on that question, and just any final thoughts as well.
Sure, thanks. I'll try to be brief. So from our view, I think it would be really good to see a requirement for provenance metadata really to be maintained wherever that content goes. So today, as I said, it's technically possible to use content credentials. It's been implemented in lots of great tools already, but today, even if a campaign, for example, creates content with content credentials, a platform might strip the metadata away. So we think any government around the world should at least look at requiring platforms to carry those provenance data when it's attached to a piece of content, right? So that kind of combines a bit what the previous questions about this Online Safety Act was, because in the Online Safety Act, there's also a requirement for Ofcom that they will have a duty to cooperate with regulated services to equip users with tools to understand reliability, accuracy, and authenticity of user-generated content. And I think that would feed in nicely, would be a good way of closing that loop. And then really looking at the UK parties, I think they should really set an example through adoption. They could set the standard for applying this level of digital content transparency in their own communications. So from our point of view, it would be a great signal to show that they're actually embracing the power of AI and generative AI while adhering to standards like transparency and authenticity at the same time.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Henry, finally.
I think two things. I alluded to the foreign interference offence. Believe it or not, it's not actually law at the moment. We hope it will very soon, but that needs to come into play very quickly. And I think we need to go further and actually set out for platforms what a really clear definition of what we actually mean. What is it that they need to be looking for? What does good look like in terms of curbing the dissemination of this? So what standards under the Online Safety Act are adequate risk mitigation against this and risk assessment? And that's the role of the regulator. I was quite disappointed to see in the consultation that they published, I think on November the 9th, how thin the detail was on that. It's really important. The other key thing, which I don't think a lot of people have really clocked, is that there is actually a content credential system in place now for election material in the UK. It came in November. And you're starting to see it. So if you look at politicians' Twitter handles right now, you'll see in the bottom corner, they've started to write their address under their photos. Okay? There's a reason for that. It's a digital imprint regime that has now come in that actually is a requirement for politicians and people registered with the Electoral Commission to put imprints on their material to let everyone know that it is actually from them. Now, the key thing about this is that it doesn't actually apply to people who are not registered with the Electoral Commission. So there's a massive loophole there in the sense that politicians have to put on election material if they produced it, who produced it. But if somebody wants to put some fake election material out there, they don't have to put an imprint on it. Except, very interestingly, in Scotland. In Scotland they do, as long as they're not expressing a personal opinion. There's an exemption for that. So we would argue a very simple solution here is to introduce a harmonised set of rules covering all three parts of the UK for digital imprints for all election material, unless that person circulating the election material is expressing a personal opinion. And the government might say, that's quite hard. Well, it's been done in Scotland, it's been there since 2021, it's operating. And that at the very least, and I'm not saying this is foolproof, but at the very least would give everyone in the audience here some sort of assurance that what they're looking at may or may not be linked to an election campaign, it's not got an imprint on it, maybe they should just look at it a little bit more closely. And they need to change the system to make sure that happens. That would be something very simple.
Thanks, Henry. And thank you very much all. I think that about takes us to time. I feel like we've only really scratched the surface on what's a very interesting issue. I can see some hands up in the audience, so we're happy to kind of share details if anyone wants to take any questions and speak to our speakers offline, then we'll be happy to do that. We've only got 5 minutes and appreciate I want to give everyone a quick break. There are drinks outside, so please do help yourselves. And then we will reconvene for our final session at 4:15 in the main hall on what do the next 12 months look like. But just wanted to say a final thank you to everyone that's attended and also to our great panelists and online for today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.